strong rebuttal, reaction, and denial from Trump and his allies.
I don't do drawings. I'm not a drawing person. I don't do drawings. I'm not a drawing person. I don't do drawings of women, that I can tell you. They say there's a drawing of a woman, and I don't do drawings of women.
President Trump has filed what he calls a powerhouse lawsuit over the Wall Street Journal's Jeffrey Epstein report.
Well, that includes alleged details of a bawdy birthday note sent to disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein.
I was a very successful business guy. He was a very controversial. Who would do a controversial drawing?
Who would do a controversial drawing? The denials, the speculation, the lawsuit, all of that in July when, as you might recall, this was a very hot issue. And maybe they just wanted to buy time, try to get out of the news cycle, try to intimidate or scare people with lawsuits. And we've seen some media companies settle lawsuits regardless of the facts just to get out from under the pressure from the Trump White House. What's different today, and I want to put it back up on the screen in a moment here, when you look at this element, this document, this birthday card, whatever you want to call it, that came from the Epstein estate, it is the evidence that undercuts everything claimed by Donald Trump. And while I can't tell you what's going to happen in the lawsuit, when you look at this is bad news for Trump's lawsuit. I can tell you that today, based on public evidence as opposed to yesterday, it is far more likely that Trump will lose any effort to continue a lawsuit against the Journal when the evidence is right here and his claim is he didn't do it. But the Epstein estate, the chain of custody, has the very document. Epstein abuser's attorney is saying Trump's hypocrisy has been frustrating for the victims, and they say the president should apologize, presumably for many things, but also withdraw the lawsuit. You'll see at the end here from Mr. Edwards with today's release, referring to the image you just saw, the least Trump could do is, quote, withdraw that lawsuit. Top members of Congress want more transparency. And again, what we're learning from this subpoena, even if it seems obvious or like what people may have believed, the Journal obviously already did its fact-checking, had multiple sources, had its reasons for going forward. That's why journalism, reporting evidence, is different than just talking, especially talking done by politicians. But it is a sign that you're going to need to get the evidence and not just take the denials of the government's word on these things. Now, here's one of the Republicans who has been more straightforward about this, saying we need more disclosure. This was out during the weekend.
I think it's going to be embarrassing to some of the billionaires, some of the donors who are politically connected to his campaign. I also think Democrats are going to be implicated in this, Democrat donors. We can't avoid justice just to avoid embarrassments for some very powerful men.
That's really putting it straightforward. The actual injustices, evidence, and information, and then the so-called embarrassment for the people who may feel tied to this. There are a ton of votes to get this done. Now, if you ever follow Congress, you probably know sometimes there's a lot of votes that are like people wanting to say that they're doing something while they don't get all the way there. They say they're now 2 votes shy of the needed majority to override the Republican leadership, which is where they were late last week, which raises the question of whether Republicans, most of whom are standing by the secrecy, have kind of cut a deal. And they have some people obviously breaking ranks, but they know or think they know they're not going to lose this vote outright. We will see. This discharge petition is the technical name. We've been following that. Then there's the other bombshell, and this is one with a lot of work that went into it, because credit to the New York Times. We talk on the news sometimes about where information comes from. The Times, with a team of reporters and a ton of evidence, did an exhaustive investigative report that came out today. How one of the top banks in the country, J.P. Morgan, is, their word, enabling Epstein's crimes over the years. And this is a years-long review they did at the lucrative relationships that tied Epstein to this big bank, to specific bankers, and, this is important, to conflicts of interest, which meant that the usual policies that are supposed to at least kind of somewhat protect people if things get really obvious, if there's tens of thousands of dollars trading hands in cash or anti-money laundering flags being waved, at some point, even lucrative clients are supposed to get cut off. This report is important. I'm going to read to you from it because it shows how, in the Epstein case, that did not happen. Here's one section at Epstein's behest. The bank sets up accounts into which he transferred huge sums for young women who turned out to be victims of his sex trafficking operations. So this bank, J.P. Morgan, which is tied, by the way, to both parties, a lot of important relationships, we can get into that. JP Morgan then wired his funds overseas, also paying him millions of dollars for what were described as his consulting and introduction services of the other powerful people, mostly men that he knew. Top bank executives, according to the report, did not deal with the clear warning signs about Epstein and the illegal behavior. And remember, that's not just an ethical issue of do you want to be in business with someone like that, a fair question. It's also a legal issue because there are anti-money laundering and know your customer laws on this. And if you find out enough bad things about the customer, separate from whatever ethics you have or don't have, you have your own legal obligation to the bank to deal with that or cut the customer off. Or you yourself and the bank could get in trouble. And this bank later paid out money, but not to a degree that affected all the money it made off this. Again, reading from the Times account, bank officials anxious about Epstein's prolific wire transfers and cash withdrawals. Morgan ultimately processed over $1 billion, they estimate. They, quote, warned senior management, and they tabulate at least 4 times over 5 years, quote, the bank's leaders overrode those objections, continuing to serve Epstein. At the center of the reporting is one JP Morgan banker, Jess Staley, seen here. Now, he was seen as a both associate and friend of Epstein, meaning, and this is the way apparently Epstein cultivated things, they both did business together, but also did other things. That includes sailing on a yacht to Epstein's notorious island. And according to the Times account, he was Epstein's chief defender who admitted to having sex with an associate of Epstein. That individual, this woman, who is anonymous under the reporting here, would later allege in a lawsuit, eventually settled that Epstein sexually abused her for more than a dozen years, forcing her and others to engage in commercial sex with certain select friends. What the Times is doing there is piecing together the problem. This is the kind of
hill to die on. I did not write that letter. I did not draw that picture. We all know they were friends. It's been documented that they were friends. Why are they so concerned about admitting that Donald Trump sent him an image like this? It's not like no one knows that Donald Trump himself is body.
Yeah, well, I think it's their instinct to lie, for starters. Was when they're presented with inconvenient information, it's easier for them to talk about the fake news and blame the fake news than actually engage on the merits. On this one in particular, it is true that it's not known that Donald Trump was bawdy, but there is this mythos that Will could talk about for sure on the right, on some on the MAGA right and the QAnon right, that Trump was like fighting against, the elite pedophile rings out there, and that he was, some warrior on the inside who was going to expose all these people. And now here he is, not only not exposing them all, but writing this note to Epstein here that is just extremely familiar, right? Like it's one thing, it is true that famous people sometimes sign birthday cards for people or sign generic notes for people. That is not what we're seeing here. I mean, we have this drawing of what appears to be a young woman, I would say, and Donald Trump talking about how they share certain things in common, about how they have all these wonderful secrets together. I mean, it's a letter from 2 guys that get in trouble together and have a bromance. That's what this is. It's not some generic letter. And so I think that's why they probably are more sensitive about it, because it's not as if it's just 2 famous people getting their picture together at another famous person's party. It's more intimate.
I hear you on that. But I don't think would it be surprising that Donald Trump wrote something like this to one of his friends? No, even if that friend did turn out to be a creep, I'm not sure it would be surprising. I don't know if that inherently means that Donald Trump himself is also engaging in the same behavior. He was interacting with lots of people. I think making that jump is easier to do if the person is being cagey about it and strange and not admitting to just some obvious things. When you're not saying, yeah, I wrote this, I did do this picture. No, it's not me. Somebody else drew it. It's not my signature. When it looks exactly like your signature, that starts to raise more questions. But I want to linger on what Tim said a moment ago about the right canonizing Donald Trump as the figure who was going to expose all of this. Speaker Mike Johnson had this very weird moment on Friday where he suggested that Donald Trump was actually an FBI informant against Jeffrey Epstein. He was the one that tipped off the FBI back in the early 2000s. He walked that back and cleaned it up a bit in a statement today, but it just was out there for 3 or 4 days, out there in the press. Where does that come from, this idea that Donald Trump was the one? By the way, we had Tom Winter on earlier today. He's reviewed the documents, and the initial tip came from, according to the government documents, came from the family members of some of the girls who were victimized.
I don't know if that was for me or
Will. I'm sending that to you. I'm sorry, Will.
Oh, sure,
it was
sure.
a big wind-up.
Sure. So in this case, I mean, look, conspiracy theorists, QAnon believers, Trump supporters have had a problem for a long time, which is how do you square Donald Trump's friendship with this, convicted charged sex trafficker and pedophile, all these things, convicted pedophile. And what they came up with was, well, maybe Trump was kind of going in on the inside to expose Jeffrey Epstein. Maybe he made Alex Acosta, the prosecutor who gave Epstein a sweetheart deal. Maybe he put him in the cabinet to draw attention to how awful this deal was. So they kind of exist in this alternate universe. And that's only gotten worse since Trump tried to close the Epstein case along with Pam Bondi. And so, again, it's bizarre to me that this has reached the point where the Speaker of the House is now saying, well, maybe Trump is an FBI informant. Maybe he was working to take down Epstein. But really, I mean, they're grasping at straws because, as you said, Katie, the whole thing is really weird. The idea that Trump was friends with this notorious pedophile, and all of a sudden his administration is doing everything they can to stop this discussion about it.
This was the thing Trump said didn't exist. And this is why I put question marks up there. Because we don't know exactly what people are going to do, but if I was one of those people, I would be making an exit. And we have to ask ourselves if people will. Look at this. This was the card that the news reported on a few weeks ago now. Maybe it was a month ago now. But they didn't have the permission to release yet, right? So it was sort of given to them, or a description was given to them. And that was relayed by the Wall Street Journal, a paper that has been critical of Trump, but often praises him too, right? They're very much, when Trump does good from the perspective of a right-wing capitalist, we love him, and then otherwise we'll criticize him, right? But the point is, Trump was suing them for literally billions for the supposed fake of this card. It has all the things on it, the creepy tone, the whole a wonderful secret between him and Jeffrey, right? And how they know everything about each other and they're great pals, right? It's super weird. And look, I really want to make this clear, and I don't want to get too detailed because I'm not going to flash this up everywhere. People need to see it, but it shouldn't be paraded around because I think it depicts someone not of a sufficient age. Many people have said, why is it drawn so weirdly? Why is the top portion underdeveloped? And some have suggested that it could be because Trump's just not a very good drawer. I've seen his drawings. Honestly, I'm not a good drawer. I can't draw. So I'm not one to judge. But maybe it's just his drawing style, his illustrative style. But some have suggested that he was in particular trying to draw someone, a woman of a particular age whose physical development would look like that. How in this particular area, when you're just becoming an adult, it's not fully developed, if you get what I'm saying. When you're not quite there yet. People in the comments will finish this here. That's speculation. But I think this is the single biggest piece of proof that, one, Trump was friends with Epstein, two, knew him well, and three, maybe if only potentially, knew what Epstein was about.